Welcome to the Honest Health Podcast with your host, Jeffrey Burke. Honest Health brings you the brightest minds in the natural products industry, as well as athletes and entertainers. Jeff will keep you entertained and informed while educating on how to be successful on your healthy journeys. Now, here's your host, Jeffrey Burke.
Hello and welcome back to the Honest Health Podcast. My name is Jeffrey Burke, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a platform bringing you the most up-to-date, groundbreaking information from some of the best minds within the natural product industry, as well as many voices outside the industry. All of them with great messages and stories to share and to give us information that will make our lives better so we can get healthy, be healthy, and stay healthy. You know, if you like what we're doing here, please tell a friend and also consider giving us a like, a share, or subscribe, or better yet, do all three. My guest today is Hillary Nitschke, and you can see in the description of this program, she is an all-star. She has been in the industry for a long time. She has really helped to add so much critical information and talent to the industry, and I'm so happy I get to have her here with me today. Hey, Hillary.
Hi, happy to be here.
I'm so
Jeff.
glad to have you. How's everything going?
So far, so good. Spring is coming, which is always a fun time to experience the world around us.
It's very true out here. We're warming up out here already, so
I'll bet.
we're going to be in the 90s, I think, by the weekend. So
Oh my.
the 33 and 35 degree nights, I think, are gone. I think spring has sprung. I woke up this morning with about an inch of mulberry pollen on my car. So
Wow.
it's allergy season here too.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I got a great question for you. And I know this is a topic that you're going to do very, very well with because of your information and your wealth of information. You know, when I first started in the industry, you as well, organic was the thing. Everybody talked about organic, and if you could afford it and you could make it work for your bottom line and your wallet, it really made sense. But obviously, 40 some years later, organic is not what it was before. The soils have changed. So the new thing is regenerative, which I'm very lucky to say I'm in a brand new company that is a regenerative based company. Because with regenerative, we're thinking about the planet today, tomorrow, next week, down the road, next year, moving forward and protecting it for our kids and our kids' kids. But even more than that, there is the topic and the word sustainability. I mean, can we keep doing some of the things we're doing? Should we keep doing some of the things we're doing? So I would like it if we could start today, you know, maybe talking about sustainability. I think this would be a topic that I don't think a lot of us talk enough about, even though we should, because I think we have a tendency to live in the now and we don't really see very much further down the road. So what do you
That's
think about
true.
sustainability? I know this is something you're very fluent in.
Well, starting with what a word that you said, regenerative. So we're referring in that case generally to regenerative agriculture. And really, what does that mean? And what does it mean to the consumer? So to answer my own question first, what does it mean to the consumer? I don't know. I don't know if the consumer knows what it means. Even that distinction that we used to have, it still exists, but between organic and biodynamic, I see regenerative agriculture as biodynamic agriculture coming to the United States. Not that it's only in the United States, but that the principles of growing things beyond, okay, we're going to use safe growing methodology, but biodynamic is the grandfather, if you will, of the current regenerative movement. Of not only is it about what we put onto the soil and onto the plants as we're growing them, but having a mindset of what happens next, right? How are we regenerating the soil? And that's what, biodynamic growing, and that's what a lot of what we see in Europe as certified organic, it's that Demeter certification, that biodynamic certification. And thank goodness there's more and more awareness beginning, and more growers/companies that are looking to procure ingredients that are coming from this movement, because we do need to look at the future of the planet that's not getting any bigger, but the population is. So how do we support this growing population and that popularity? So, I'll segue quickly, but we can always go back to plants that, take, for example, the omega-3 market and fish oil that we are already really, it's not we're in danger of overfishing. We really are overfishing our oceans already, mostly because they're not regenerating, they being the fish, always in the quantity that we need with our growing population and with the amount of pollution and warming temperatures in the oceans and things like that are changing. So this also comes back to the consumer needing to ask the right questions from their brands, from the places where they shop, whether it's for the fish that they're buying to consume for dinner or the omega-3 supplements. And I'm all for algae-based omega-3 if it's what somebody really wants, but I really think that the fish-based omega-3s are, I know that they are more potent and they offer more. And a lot of people would say, well, it's impossible to have a sustainably grown omega-3 from fish. And that's not true. There are sustainable fisheries. There are sustainably made products of a wide variety, some from Alaskan fisheries, some from fisheries in Norway. And it's all part of maintaining that same cultural question of how do we support the planet? And when we do that, we support ourselves. We support our ongoing vitality. And isn't that what it's all about?
That's very true. Those were beautiful words. Thank you. And I really do think that as we start to become more aware, more out of necessity, maybe, but I don't care, awareness wherever it comes from.
Right.
I look at it sometimes because I think the biggest problem today, first of all, it's hard enough to get people to want to get healthy without a magic wand doing all the work for them.
Yeah.
I'm guilty. I would love a magic wand.
Sure, we all would.
But on top of that, it's just so they decide to start taking supplements. So they actually go and they purchase their supplements. So that's another big step. But, we have a lot of asks. We want them to start asking questions, about, what do you know about the history of this company? Is this company organic? Is this company certified organic? Is it certified regenerative? Are the things in this product made sustainable? And then are the people that we have in our industry, are we all up to date?
Right.
And how often is this stuff changing? And how often do we need a refresher course to be able to answer the questions with a transparent attitude?
Yeah. And, you use the word a refresher course. It's, we need to regenerate the questions because
True.
the questions change too.
Yes.
And I feel for the consumer, both the new consumer and the consumer that is only depending upon those direct to consumer brands, many of which are great. Like I'm not going to disparage, like I've discovered that a lot of these direct to consumer brands are absolutely, they're not just talking the talk, they are walking it. They are
True.
looking towards the quality of what they produce and what it produces when it's consumed, right?
Exactly.
But also there's a lot of glitz out there and on both sides, right? I mean, some of what we can see in retail, depending upon how discerning the retailer is the retailer asking the right questions. But, let's face it, in this busy world, there are a lot of people who are not going to that expert retailer. They are just, click, click, done, right? And the question I don't know the answer to is how do you, as a consumer that's not a part of our natural products industry, how do you decipher without the help of a retailer? I mean, my answer is, well, take the time, make that your Saturday afternoon activity or your 5 p.m. after work one day on your way home. Like, it's equally as important to spend that time as it is to spend your time getting your 30 minutes of exercise in, right? Because this is exercising your brain for the value of your body ongoing of what you're consuming.
It's a really good point because I think to myself sometimes, why do we not prioritize ourselves to the level that we should? We know better. We know we should. And what's really motivating for most people, I hate to say, is drama, trauma, and something bad happening that suddenly motivates us to say, okay, yeah, now it's time. I need to do something. I have to. But When it was just a good idea, not enough motivation there. And I think what ends up happening is we kind of push everything to the back burner, and I'll get to it, I'll get around to it. It's like those projects around the house, the honey-do list, that you should be working on. And all of a sudden the list is 4 feet long because you haven't done any of them. It's the same thing with our health and well-being. If you plan on living long and living well and living healthy, you have got to put the time and the effort in. And the thing about it is, has online shopping become very easy? Yes, it has. Has it become convenient? Absolutely. But are we losing the one-on-one directed conversation that's all about us individually
Absolutely.
with the one-on-one at the store that I was
Right.
raised in?
Right.
Because you can't have a real one-on-one on the online thing, but in a store you could walk in
Not
and
with a
say,
chat bot.
no, you can't. And then you think to
Hmm.
yourself sometimes, I don't care what it's doing for everybody else. I need to talk about me, what I'm
Right.
going through. Can we tailor this to me? You can only get that on a one-to-one.
Right. Right. And so many people, you hit the nail on the head when you said that it's drama, trauma, and whatever else, the third one, I don't know, but that's what leads people, forces people to take action. But this was many years ago, having a conversation with someone, and they knew what garlic powder was, right? That's something that you spice your pizza with or something like that. But
Mhm.
they had no idea, like they couldn't identify a bulb of garlic, or the garlic clove. They saw garlic as this thing that comes in a powder in a jar. And that's still a problem, right? That didn't go away. Of like, where do our ingredients come from? Where does our food come from? Where do our supplements come from? And then beyond that, oh, I might have learned, say back to omega 3s, that my next door neighbor, or the person I sit next to at church, or the person I do run into at the grocery store, told me that they're healthier now, or their joints feel better. My ski buddy is saying, "Oh, my joints don't hurt like they used to because I do this." Taking that in, becoming inquisitive once you get that morsel of information, right? Don't stop with the morsel. Use that to become inquisitive, to really get the information that you need to drive you forward for years of vitality, right?
And don't settle for something just to take something. I
Right,
use this story a lot because we do not all fit in the same box.
right.
We are all different. We're all coming from different places. I wait on 3 or 4 set of identical twins that have lived in Vegas and California. I still wait. I still counsel them now years later, 40 years later. And these were all identical twins. Did I treat each of them individually or as a pair? I treated them individually because this one drinks, this one doesn't. This one smokes, this one doesn't. This one's very wealthy, has no trouble paying for the best of the best. This one's pinching pennies trying to buy the most inexpensive, affordable vitamin C they can afford. And the
Hmm.
thing is, their bodies may be genetically the same, but they are different.
Well, you hit on something really important and really interesting, right? That some big words, nutrigenomics and epigenetics, right? So, you know, we'll start with the second one first. Epigenetics is that just because you have a genetic, I know I don't need to explain this to you, but for our listeners,
Please do.
just because one might have a genetic predisposition
Mhm.
for something does not mean, something good or bad, does not mean that those genes are going to be expressing themselves, or in the case of something good, they might not be expressing themselves, right? So epigenetics is, how can we, through our diet and lifestyle, um, help to guide the way that our genes express, right? Nutrigenomics is related. How do the foods and supplements we ingest affect how our genes express, affect how epigenetics happens, right? So there are many different nutrients. I mean, even just to name a few off the top of my head: berberine, that isn't terribly well absorbed, but actually benefits you without being absorbed. OPCs from grapeseed and pine bark, same thing. That you're not only getting an antioxidant benefit from what your body absorbs, but it's like an on and off switch. It's turning on, it's giving a messaging. The same is true with certain metabolites of fish oil. It's turning on that anti-inflammatory messaging system. So I mean, it's a perfect example to say that even people who are genetically the same, and the place where you're going to find that only 100% genetically the same are those identical twins, that nonetheless, even though they're genetically the same, their epigenetics based on their nutrigenomics, which is not only the nutrition that we take in, but also the world we're exposed to, right? If one, to your point, has enough money and they like to eat vegetables and they eat well and they don't have stress, their epigenetic profile is going to be could be very different from their genetically identical twin.
Yep.
Who might be, eating French fries and working 12-hour days, et cetera, not sleeping well or whatever, right?
Misinformation and thank you for your point. I love to listen to you talk. You know, information, bad information, being misinformed, being naive, guessing, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I mean, we do a lot of these things to try to get some kind of answers because we really don't want to commit too much time, even though we should be committing all the time we need. But, I think it's funny to your point about someone not recognizing a garlic bulb. I think it's funny. I was watching this like interview the other day, and it was kids that were like 5 and 6. So they asked one of the kids in the front, they said, "Where does food come from?" And they said, "The grocery store." And they said, "Where is the food grown?" They said, "In the back of the grocery store." And I had to pause it because I started laughing to myself, and then I thought, oh my. So he asked another person, little boy in the audience, he says, "What do you think?" He goes, "Well, yeah." He goes, "Everything is done at the grocery store." And he goes, "And when they're done, they bring it out from the back and to the front." He goes, "Well, what about the meat and the chickens?" He said, "Well, they have a place in the back of the store." And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, I didn't know what to
Right.
think.
I mean, they are correct, sort of, right? My daughter went to a farm school, and when she was, and pigs are very sensitive and very intelligent, and pigs grow better, if you want to put it that way, when they have stimulation and love, much like a dog is going to have a healthier life when we love it, we care for it, we talk to it. And so the 6-year-olds took care of the pigs all year, and they would hold them, and I mean, at a point, the pigs got a little too large to hold. But at any rate, and one day, my daughter comes home from school and she says, "Mom, the pigs are going into sausage tomorrow." And then she stopped, and she loved sausage and she loved pig-based foods. They were some of her favorites. Not that we had too many of them, but some. And anyway, and she stops and she repeats the sentence, slowing down each word. "The pigs are going into sausage." And she looks at me and she says, "What does that mean?" And after that, she decided to be vegetarian, didn't last. And we talked about the value of nutrition and how we can choose our foods, and how, that these pigs had a good life and a happy life. And now they went into sausage and ham, and that there was value there, and that there was value to the fact that these pigs, didn't live in a cubicle, and different things. So that, even so, beyond things being fished sustainably, we can grow our meat, if you want to put it that way, sustainably. And yet, with a growing population, the need for that regenerative agriculture, which allows us to functionally grow more in a healthy way in smaller space, also is such a big deal.
That's interesting. There's so much information out there, and when you come from kind of our generation, we've learned a lot of this. Some of the stuff we just learned. I mean, I grew up near the farms out in the country, so I mean, I saw a lot of this. I mean, I saw veal and lamb and all that kind of stuff. I don't eat any of that because I experienced it on the farm, and I'm like, nope. But I do eat meat. I do eat chicken. I do eat fish. Those are like my main proteins. But you like you said, you can choose your protein,
Right.
the things you may feel the most connected and comfortable with.
hmm And I have a large community garden plot. It's about 15 feet by 15 feet. And then there's an extra little space. I don't know. It's another 3 feet by 2 feet. But anyway, it's a lot. It's a lot to care for. And there are certain times of the year, this being one of them, when you're starting to prep the garden. And we also come together as a group to maintain the entire space. It's a small community garden. There are 9 plots, so we all know each other well. But anyway, it's a lot of work prepping
Mhm.
our individual plots, as well as just making sure the pathways aren't full of weeds and the fences are keeping the rabbits out, and all the things that we do. And then it's also, of course, very labor intensive when one is planting, and then the very beginning of managing weed control. And then you have a little bit of a break when things are just growing. I mean, you're still in there working, but it's not it's not an overwhelming, time commitment. And then it can even become overwhelming when you harvest, right? Because you that's on a time frame
Mhm.
that must occur at a certain point. And I've had people say, well, why do you do it when it's so easy to go to the store, go to the farmer's market, and you're growing way more than you need for your small family. And I'm like, there is nothing that gives me more joy than bringing somebody fresh tomatoes from the garden, sharing those fresh tomatoes from the garden. And those days when I might have wanted to maybe do something else, which could have been just maybe sleep an extra half hour. Um, but I went to the garden early because it requires that time. And I had a wonderful experience with a hummingbird or a butterfly, or who knows, right? With our hands in the soil, and how that personal regeneration. And not everybody has that opportunity, but even, if you live in a city or in an apartment, and you can't, you don't have the space at your home. Like, I have very small space at my home with a pine tree, so shade and pine needles. It's not a good combo for growing much. But, I pursued a community garden plot, even just potted plants. I mean, and I do a bunch of pots out on my porch. And even that, I've had friends, oh, it's costs so much money. You get these flowers every year and then they die. And I'm like, yes, but all season, every day, they bring me joy. I can't wait to go outside and see my friends in the morning, like who's blooming today, you know?
I love it. I mean, I think that we can get so many wonderful things from nature, and yeah, it's a lot of time. It's like with my horses. I
Hmm.
don't compete. I travel so much these days that most of the time they end up being wonderful feeding machines, living out their life and getting the best of everything. One just turned 30, so
Wow.
there,
Hmm.
we have 9. No, we have 10 and a third because we have a mini. That's a support
Hmm.
mini.
Hmm.
But the thing is, if I go down there and I hug one of my horses, I kid you not, I feel that all the way down to my toes. There's
Hmm.
just something about that connection. Last year, I timed the event of being in Michigan during my family's prime time gardening. So everything was ripe. And I literally went and sat on the dirt in the middle of the garden with a little salt shaker, and I just ate whatever I could reach. And I'll tell you what, they take such amazing care of their soil, and they add so much good stuff to it. And with all the farms that are there, it's amazing. Soil is still dark black, and that's the place I was raised in. So that house and that is well in its 60, 70 years old. But there was nothing like it. I was just in heaven. I put my music on. I sat there and just ate and looked at the sky and, just enjoyed myself. That's priceless. I get it.
Hmm. I just yesterday, walking my dog, ended up walking along this creek that they've done some remediation work to, just open it up a little bit and make sure that there aren't dead tree branches falling and whatnot. So there's an area that we weren't able to walk, that my dog took me to yesterday, that we are now able to walk. And I found nettles growing. And I used to have a nettle patch in my yard, but again, at this point, I have too small of a yard, and I haven't added them to the community garden because they do spread so much.
Yeah.
That I think my garden neighbors, it's already enough that I keep the lemon balm in the plot, um, and that can create some wandering lemon balm in other people's plots. But I'm like, it's lemon balm. And, and portulaca, certain things I make sure that I teach the other gardeners about the value of these weeds that people think are useless, that they actually have nutritional value. But I was so excited to find some stinging nettle growing wild right near my home, in a place that is clean enough that I can pick it at a point.
Yeah, ask you a question off the topic, but still things that I know that you're so well versed in. The idea of pharmaceutical drugs today is it's kind of gone through a metamorphosis to the point where we don't just think about medication anymore as a situational way of getting from point A to point B and getting over a hump or a trauma or a health condition. We think of it a way as being able to manage something and allow it to be in complete control of the situation and take the responsibility in our mind away from us from making any real changes. So the thing is, people will say, and I hear it all the time, I don't need to worry about that. I take medication for it. Well, you could also be eating a better diet, being more active, managing your stress, getting sleep, using garlic and onions, and taking cayenne pepper and hawthorn and things for your blood pressure. Well, I take medication, so I don't need to do any of that. So that mentality is out there. I
Yes.
think the one medication that still irks me the most, that I think ends up being utilized and recommended so often, and it seems like it's just has become a good idea in that mindset to take as a statin.
I knew that's where you were going.
Oh.
Well, I will say, and I haven't read this directly. I haven't read the studies, but I believe, just before we disparage too much, I believe that some of the newer studies on statins do show some value that we might have been unaware of
Mhm.
before, for cardiovascular health, not just lowering cholesterol, but actually managing vascularity in a way we didn't realize. But I haven't read the studies, so I can't say any more than that. Um, but I have been reading quite a bit about SPMs, specialized pro-resolving mediators, which are a metabolite of EPA and DHA. And of course, as the research on the value of them comes out, certainly drugs will be created from them too, which made me a little sad in that, will they work the way the naturally occurring SPMs do, or are we going to have this overly targeted approach, which is what usually happens with pharmaceuticals versus a natural product? Um, Now I've sort of totally gone off the subject, but it's related in that that SBMs do have that value for cardiovascular health, and we're seeing more and more about it, and that trying to identify that in our omega 3s, which can be done, and it comes down to, and sometimes this is where pharmaceutical drugs sometimes have an advantage, is it does come down to, we aren't what we eat or even what we ingest. We are what we metabolize. So sometimes certain drugs are created in such a way that they are easier to metabolize, or they're more metabolically active, or looking at something like SPMs, if we're able to quantify the SPMs, which we can actually do with EPA and DHA, but that making sure you have a guaranteed quantity is pretty important. Um, but back to the original thing that you said, it does always make me not a little bit, very sad and frustrated when people say, "Well, I don't need to manage it myself anymore because I just take this drug," and I'm like, "Well, okay, I'm not, I would never say to somebody, don't take the drug. However, don't you want to help manage it? Like, don't you want to support your body in its good health by doing these things that maybe will allow you to reduce the amount of medication and maybe even come off of certain medications?" I mean, we know that polypharmacy is a huge issue that is really dangerous to people as they age. When suddenly somebody is on 7 or 9 drugs, and you've got all these different specialists, and maybe the kidney specialist that came on board after the 3 other specialists that gave you 2 or 3 drugs apiece, they didn't even, that none of whom, now it's better a little bit with digital stuff, but that Dr. A, B, and C, they're not even judging what the drug that they are giving you, or drugs that they're giving you, may affect the drugs that another doctor is giving you. Now you just need another specialist, right, to manage that, your liver and kidneys. So, of course, it always still matters that we come back to, self regeneration, right?
I have a group of friends that are doctors, and we get together, and they're so much better now than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago, where they didn't even want to open their door to anything. Now they come to me, and we have conservations. We do kind of like meet and greet kind of stuff, updates on what they're doing. They're asking questions. This isn't for my patients. This is for me, or whatever. And but they become a little bit more aware. So we had the statin conversation a couple of months ago, and there's like 7 of them, and they all take a statin. And I said, why are you all taking a statin? And they're like, well, we hear it's preventive, it's yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, so I went along with the conversation. None of them had high blood pressure. None of them had cholesterol that was out of balance. I think one did. His ratio was really poor. They all had really good or above average HDL. They were all very active. They played golf. They had a running club. They got together. They cycle. There's 6 of them. And the other one just joined, and he's the one with the unhealthy kind of situation. But they said, don't you believe in preventive? And I said, really? You're asking me that?
Right.
I said, of course I do, but I don't believe in my mind, in my heart. I can't wrap my mind around a preventive medication that is not needed right now.
Well, one of the phrases that I've heard recently, and I'll just go ahead and steal it, but it's not my own, is test, don't guess. And that didn't used to be an option until pretty recently with so many different things. I mean, sure, obviously the medical testing and testing our blood for things like cholesterol has been available for a long time. But I mean, that's the perfect example of HDL and LDL are only a very, very small part of the picture.
Mhm.
And, the average doctor, including even until very recently, cardiologists aren't testing for certain genetic risk factors like LP little a, ApoB, things that are very specific to our increased risk for cardiovascular incident, right? And then once they test you, especially LP little a, because there is no drug yet, although there are some in production, and they hopefully will save many lives, but because they don't have an answer that they can write down on a prescription pad and send you to the pharmacy, although now I'm really dating myself, right? Because nobody does that anymore. It's all electronic. But anyway, until there's a drug, they're like, okay, well, we know you have this genetic risk factor. We never need to test it again. And I'm like, really? Why not? Why wouldn't you want to test it again when things like our diet or our medication or our supplementation are perhaps going to make a difference in that epigenetic profile? Is it going up? Is it getting worse? Or is it getting better? Right. And then are we paying enough attention to, well, I got tested, in November, right before the holiday season, which is not only very stressful for me, but I also eat too many sweets. So I'm not getting the sleep, I'm not getting exercise, and I'm not eating properly. Okay. If that's the case for you, then let's test you before and after, right? And then let's test you again 3 months later, right? Now, this isn't always an option for everybody because these tests are expensive, although they're becoming much more reasonable with different groups like Function Health. There's a couple other ones that are offering this ability to order these tests independently and keep a measure of how different markers are looking, from whether it's fasting blood glucose, which of course is only a snapshot of what's happening this morning, right, to A1C, which is our 90-day snapshot of how our blood sugar is looking, to cortisol. There's so many different things that are going to factor into our how our genetic profile is expressing itself.
It's funny. I was talking with someone the other day about vitamin D, and they said, do you remember in 1980, 81, when vitamin D would be in the health food store? It was on the bottom shelf next to the omega-3s, and they just collected dust because they didn't want us really talking about vitamin D because it was already in a multiple. And if you took more, it was considered toxic. I said, yeah.
Right,
And they go, isn't it amazing today how it's eye level and there's 20 brands of it, and now they're testing your blood to see where you are, and most people are low. And I just,
right. And I love the people who say, oh, well, I get a lot of sun, so I must be fine. I'm like, really? Do you get sun on over 80% of your body in an area with a high enough UV? Because I'm guessing you're wearing more clothes than that. And, there's a good chance you're using sunscreen or you're just not at that, latitude that it's enough sun. And even, I recently had my vitamin D tested, and I take vitamin D and vitamin K2 every day, which optimizes vitamin D. And my vitamin D was low. I was
Hmm.
shocked.
Hmm.
So even, so I'm like, okay, apparently I'm a couple of things, possibly not taking enough of it, and also not, again, we aren't what we ingest, we're what we metabolize. So I thought I was doing it in an optimal format with the vitamin K2, but I've got to make some changes, right? And and the onus is on me to know what the tests mean, know how to get the test, what tests to
Yep.
get, and what they mean, because no one else really does it for us at this point. But there are services now that aggregate the information, that make suggestions as to what tests we should get,
Yep.
and then and offer, memberships or whatever. You pay for 6 months or a year at one time.
My mother has a hard time metabolizing vitamin D. She's 90. And so they give her 100,000 units once a week. And that's what she takes. And with that 100,000 units, she's barely in the normal range. And that's with K2 and everything else. And
Yeah,
that's with omega 3s and fish and all that kind of stuff. So
right.
I was taking 1,000 units a day with K2, and I was just like, I've got this. And I went in for my blood work and I said, would you do a vitamin D test? He goes, sure. So he did the D, and it came back, and I was like, no way. And he's like,
Mhm.
you need to increase your level. So I take 5,000 a day, and I went back for a second and a third test, and I'm right where I should be. But I was just like, I got this down, and I didn't have it down.
Well, and the trick question is, where should you be? Because what
Hmm.
a um, traditional MD, their
Hmm.
levels, they say to be between 30 and 50,
Hmm.
but what a functional medicine doc is going to say is more like between 50 and 80, more like
Hmm.
between 70 and 80. So, you know, what a regular doctor, and if you're at 30.1, they're like, check, you're good.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like testosterone. These men go in for the testosterone check, and if they're like between about 200 and 1,000, and they're in that range, it's so common for the doctor to say you're fine. But here you have
Hmm.
somebody who has estrogenic associations in his lifestyle. He has no energy. He has no strength. He's got libido problems. He's got high stress. He has trouble building muscle. And they're not going to give him anything because insurance won't cover it because of his level. So he comes over to the other side. He starts taking, arginine and citrulline and ashwagandha and natural things. And all of a sudden he finds that he starts elevating, his free testosterone. And he goes back to the doctor, and the doctor he says, see, that medication worked great. He goes, you didn't give me any medication.
Right.
So it's not just about the bedroom, it's about many other factors for men.
Right.
Men are
For
actually
sure. Yeah.
talking about things now,
Yeah,
which is
well, and
better.
women too, right? I mean, menopause used to be something to be embarrassed by.
Absolutely.
And and yet it's something that more than 50% of the population, because I understand it's more than, we're more than 50% women. This is if you are lucky enough to live long enough, this is something that will occur to you, you know, and as a woman. And, for men, it's a less obvious time of transition, but men change hormonally over time as well. And
True.
I've told people for many years, I mean, you should start testing things like your thyroid and your sex hormone levels when you feel great at 30 or 35, because to your point, being in normal range at say 50, but you feel like crap, like you obviously are clearly showing symptoms of low levels. What were your levels when you felt better? Right. And now it's too
Good
late to
point.
find out.
Yeah, that's brilliant. No, that's a good point. There's a lot of coulda, shoulda, woulda hindsight there,
Hmm.
you know?
And, or there's a lot of, you can feel a lot better at 50 than you did at 30
Mhm.
if you are managing that personal regeneration with a healthy diet and healthy lifestyle as best we can.
I love that. I still think it's never too late to do something good for you.
For
I still
sure.
think it's never too late to make a change. And even if you have an amazing track record of failure, I usually tell people, where was I? I was in Pennsylvania, and I was doing a lecture, and we were talking about success rates and thing. And this lady stands up and she said, I fail every time I want to lose weight. And I said, okay.
Oh,
She says, I last about a month or two and then I don't do anything. And I said, have you ever sat down with someone and get your blood work done and find out where you are in all these matters? And she says, no, I keep trying everything that my friends are trying. And I said, okay, you do realize that you are an individual and everybody's different, and you can still get to that finish line, but you may be on a completely different path than everybody else to get there. And you can wave at them as you're running across the finish line with them. I said, but I think you need to sit down with someone and let them ask you the questions that need to be asked, and you be honest with yourself about what you're
Right.
really doing and what you will do. So I heard
Right.
back from her about maybe 5 or 6 weeks later. I guess she met with someone the next week. Her insurance covered it. And she found out that she had a lot of food allergies. She had a thyroid condition that she didn't know about and some other factors. So she started following more of a Mediterranean diet.
Mhm.
So she said she lost about 14 pounds the first month. She said,
Wow.
I've never done that. And I said,
Mhm.
so how do you feel? And she goes, in one word. I said, yeah. And she goes, motivated. And I
Right.
said, she says, I just never thought, I figured that if I kept trying it from process of elimination, something would work. And I said, it doesn't always mean that.
Yeah.
So it made me feel good that she took the time. And I tell the same thing to everybody else. If you have a history of not doing so well with your ventures, with your health conditions, and taking control of the choices you're making, you may need to sit down with somebody, a nutritionist, a
Yep.
naturopath, a dietitian, somebody that can give you some guidance.
Well, guidance and accountability, because at
Yes.
the very beginning of what you said, she said, well, I fail.
Yep.
So it's like somebody who you meet and you exchange each other's names, and this person says to you, and this used to be me, I'm really bad with names. I've now just looked, you've introduced yourself, I've gotten your name, and I've looked you in the eye and said, I'm not going to remember your name, right? Because I just gave myself permission to not remember. So when somebody says, well, I've tried to lose weight and I fail every time. Now, what they're saying to you is, even if I'm not really going to try, I might make a small effort. But once I started saying to people, sometimes it takes me a few tries to remember your name, but I'm going to try. I sure started to do quite a lot better at remembering people's names right off the bat.
I love that. Thank you. I'm stealing that. Thank you. I love that. That was great. So let me ask you a question. First of all, I want to ask if you'll come back again. I love having you on.
Of course.
Okay, because there's so many things we could talk about.
Yep.
We can nerd out, keep it whatever. But
Hmm.
my question for you is, what is your thought of the day that you would like people to walk away with that might make them stop and say, huh?
I should have known you were going to ask this question because I think you've asked me this question before, and I'm once again entirely unprepared. I did not think of it or think of an answer. Of Okay, ask me the question again.
What is the one
Thought
thing
of the
that you
day.
would like people to think about? A thought of the day that might just make them stop and say, I never thought of that.
That each of us, no matter this comes from our conversation, no matter our motivation, um, often could use an accountability coach. That could be anybody from your dog taking you for a walk to a friend that you're going to check in with to say, I did my 30 minutes of exercise, or I didn't eat that cookie after dinner, even though I wanted it, or I did eat that cookie, but I then went for an extra walk, or you know what? I ate that cookie and I just loved it. So it can be somebody that actually is joining you on the journey, and it can be somebody who's simply there to support and to be help you remain accountable to yourself. And for all of us to admit that that sometimes we need help with accountability, that even that you're the only person you need to be accountable to, but that we all do better when we have the support of someone in our community.
I love that. Thank you so much. I hope you guys love this today because I think it's fantastic. I've been speaking with Hillary Nitschke today. We've talked about a lot of different things, but the conversation with wonderful undertones of taking care of yourself, taking responsibility, asking questions, and being accountable for the things that you're doing. Every time that you think about the show, bring a friend, have them tune in. I want to make sure that we have the best information available from the best minds in the industry. And don't forget to give us a like, a share, subscribe subscribe. We want to make sure that everybody's aware of what we're doing here. I appreciate you all being here. Hillary, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's do it again.
Please be well. God bless.
Stay tuned for more information from the Honest Health Podcast with Jeffrey Burke. And make sure to check back often for interviews and conversations from the guests we all want to hear from. I'm John the Announcer. Thanks for listening.